You know that feeling when your brain just feels like it's completely at war with itself? We've all had those moments where our thoughts seem to run on a totally separate track from our rational mind. Well, today in this explainer, we're jumping right into the fascinating core biological reasons behind exactly why that happens. If you're one of those people who spends the early hours of the morning just staring wide-eyed at the ceiling, overthinking literally every tiny detail of your life, you are definitely not alone. It's so easy to feel like anxiety and depression are just abstract concepts, things that are all in your head. But the truth is that 3 a.m. rumination is actually tied to some very real, highly measurable biological processes. So here's a really crucial realization. Feeling like anxiety and depression are two sides of the same coin? That's actually a clinical reality. We're talking a massive 60 to 75% of patients diagnosed with major depressive disorder who also have an accompanying anxiety disorder. It's a huge biological overlap, which means if we treat them as completely separate issues, we're totally missing the bigger picture. Chronologically speaking, though, they don't usually crash the party at the same time. Anxiety is kind of like that unwanted guest that shows up way too early, often around age 11. It acts as this chronic, low-grade stressor. Imagine carrying a heavy weight on your back every single day. Eventually, it completely wears you down. And that's usually when depression shows up much later in adulthood, right as your system basically just burns out. To make sense of this massive overlap, psychologists rely on what's called the tripartite model. This model identifies the exact shared root of both conditions, which they call negative affect. Now, that's just the formal scientific term for general distress, irritability, and that pervasive, inescapable sense of worry. Basically, it's the common soil that both anxiety and depression grow out of. Now, where these conditions branch off from that shared root is absolutely fascinating. Anxiety manifests as physiological hyperarousal. That's your heart racing, your palms sweating, adrenaline spiking for absolutely no logical reason. Depression, on the other hand, shifts into anhedonia, which is a total inability to feel pleasure or experience positive emotions. So one is an engine revving completely out of control, and the other is an engine that just flat out won't start. Okay, let's look under the hood at the brain, because this whole experience really comes down to a specific network of structures that are just no longer cooperating. We're looking at the amygdala, the prefrontal cortex, and the HPA axis. First up is the amygdala. Think of this as your brain's emotional hub and primary threat detector. In a highly anxious state, your amygdala goes into complete overdrive, triggering these exaggerated fear responses to totally neutral everyday things. But in a depressed state, it gets stuck in what scientists call a negative emotional bias, meaning it hyperfocuses almost exclusively on sad or negative stimuli, completely ignoring the good. Normally, your brain has a built-in brake system called the prefrontal cortex. Its whole job is to step in, use logic, and calm that hyperactive amygdala down. But in both anxiety and depression, the prefrontal cortex becomes underactive. You lose that crucial top-down regulation. Without those brakes, you get trapped in endless loops of rumination without an off switch. You just can't logically talk yourself down from the ledge of your own thoughts. And that brings us right to the HPA axis, which is your body's primary stress response system. When you're constantly stressed, the loop that usually tells your body to physically chill out, it breaks down. It floods your body with the stress hormone cortisol, keeping you in this prolonged state of high alert that just completely drains your physical and mental energy over time. But here's what's truly mind-blowing about the research. This hyperactivity of the HPA axis is actually most pronounced when you have both conditions at the exact same time. Let that sink in for a second. The comorbidity of anxiety and depression isn't just two separate conditions sitting side by side. It creates its very own distinct biological marker. It's a completely unique biological state. We also have to talk about neurotransmitters for a minute. Things like serotonin and dopamine, those chemical messengers that regulate our sleep and mood. Both conditions share a severe dysregulation here. But get this, a staggering 90% of your body's serotonin isn't even produced in your brain. It's actually produced in your gut. This literally changes the entire game on how we view mental health. Because so much serotonin is made down there, your digestion and your mood are intimately linked. If your gut bacteria gets out of balance, it causes intestinal permeability. That essentially sends systemic inflammation straight through your body and right up into your brain. This neuroinflammation makes all of those overthinking, anxious, and depressive symptoms significantly worse. It's wild, but your gut health is literally shaping your mental health.
And the overlap goes even deeper than that, right down into our DNA. Genome-wide studies have proven that the personality trait known as neuroticism acts as a massive genetic bridge between anxiety and depression. In fact, neuroticism shares roughly 70% of its genomic regions with depression. It really shows us that some of this vulnerability is fundamentally written into our biology.
On top of that, our life experiences can actually physically alter how that DNA is expressed. Experiencing trauma can cause epigenetic changes to specific genes, like the FKBP5 gene. When this gene is altered by trauma, it literally breaks your stress feedback loop. You're left with a hyper-reactive stress response that persists well into adulthood. You end up carrying that trauma like a heavy, invisible backpack everywhere you go.
I know, that is some heavy science to take in, but understanding this core material is actually incredibly empowering. Because these conditions share so many underlying biological mechanisms, treatments like the Unified Protocol are highly effective. This is a transdiagnostic therapy, which means instead of treating the symptoms separately, it targets the exact shared root vulnerabilities, like emotional avoidance, that cause both issues in the first place. This is exactly why combining approaches work so remarkably well. Often, combining medication with therapies like cognitive behavioral therapy acts as a sort of biological bridge. The medication steps in to dial down that intense physical panic and hyperarousal just enough so that you finally have the mental bandwidth to actually engage in therapy and begin the healing process. So if you're out there struggling with these overlapping symptoms right now, please take this one crucial message away from today's explainer. Your brain is not broken. You are not fundamentally flawed. You are simply navigating a perfectly explainable, highly complex biological overlap of genetics, brain structure, and gut health.
We've really seen today how deeply interconnected our biological systems truly are. When you realize that healing your mind might involve looking at everything from your childhood stress responses to the actual bacteria sitting in your gut, it leaves us with a fascinating question to ponder. If your gut and brain are this connected, what else is your biology trying to tell you? Keep listening to your body, stay curious, and keep learning.